Welcome to the third video in our series, the 75 most important questions you need to know to pass your state's real estate licensing exam. This is going to be questions 51 through 75, so let's get started. So let's get started with our first question. In a buyer representation agreement, the broker acts as the agent of the buyer and must protect the buyer's interest. A, until the representation agreement is signed. B, only during property showings. C, at all points in the transaction. D, only when negotiating on behalf of the buyer. So like we normally do, I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about this, then I'll give us our answer. That answer is at all points in the transaction. In a buyer representation agreement, the broker acts as the agent of the buyer and must protect the buyer's interest at all points in the transaction. Simply that. Next question. Air pollution from automobile traffic near a building with ornate exterior decoration has dissolved much of the intricate detail work. The cost of restoring the front of the building is roughly 5 times the building's present value. These facts describe A, incurable physical deterioration. B, curable external deterioration. C, curable external obsolescence. Or D, incurable functional obsolescence. And your answer is going to be incurable physical deterioration. Air pollution has damaged the old design, and the cost of correcting the defect is not financially feasible. That's what makes it incurable. Curable means the cost of the cure would be equivalent to or exceed, would add that to a value. This is an example of incurable physical deterioration. The physical deterioration, air pollution from automobile traffic near the building with ornate exterior decoration has dissolved much of the intricate detail. That's physical deterioration, and it is incurable because the cost of the cure would be more than it would contribute to value. Our next question. Lead-based paint is found in about 75% of all private housing built before A, 1996, B, 1992, C, 1978, or D, 1985. Got a feeling you know this one. You're going to get this one right. The answer is C, 1978. The federal government estimates that lead is present in about 75% of all private housing built before 1978, the year the federal government banned the use of lead in interior paints. 1978. Any home built before 1978 with both a sale or a lease, we have to use the lead paint disclosure. Okay, our next question. What is one negative result of redlining? One negative result of redlining. A, appraisers have a difficult time evaluating properties in the area. B, real estate professionals are not able to advertise in local newspapers. C, the effects test must be applied to determine whether to file a lawsuit. Or D, it is often a major contributor to the deterioration of older neighborhoods. A negative result of redlining. And your answer is going to be D. It is often a major contributor to the deterioration of older neighborhoods. Redlining is a prohibited practice by lenders, insurance companies, and real estate professionals. It is frequently leads to the deterioration of older neighborhoods because loans are not made based on racial grounds as opposed to any objection of the applicant's creditworthiness. Literally, the lender's drawing circles around neighborhoods on a map. We don't make any loans in those neighborhoods. When a lender is deciding to make a loan, they cannot consider the address of the property. Cannot be one of their underwriting decisions. Our next question. Which of these laws extended housing discrimination protections to families with children and persons with a disability? Would that be A, the Civil Rights Act of 1968, B, the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, C, the Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988, or D, the Civil Rights Act of 1866? Which of these laws extended housing discrimination protections to families with children and persons with disabilities? Your answer is going to be C. The Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988 added disability and familial status to the list of protected classes of individuals. The Housing and Community Development Act of 1974 added sex to the list of protected classes, which is found in Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 prohibits discrimination based on race in every real estate transaction. So these are good to know for your test. Our next question is going to be, which of these is an example of a unilateral contract? A listing agreement, B, agreement of sale, C, option, or D, lease? And the answer is going to be C, option. In a unilateral contract, only one party is obligated to perform. The optionor/owner of the property must sell at the agreed upon price only if the optionee decides to buy. My best example of an option or a unilateral contract, is a coupon in the newspaper. You don't have to use that coupon, but if you do use the coupon, the store has to give you the discount advertised. Only one party is bound, the grocery store. Same thing here, a unilateral contract, only one side is bound. The tenant, if this is rent with option to buy, for example, the tenant doesn't have to buy their property, it's their option. But if they do decide to execute the option, the owner/seller would be bound. Unilateral contract, as opposed to bilateral. Our next question. Sealing off asbestos instead of removing it is called A, extended liability, B, capping, C, encapsulation, or D, irresponsible remediation. And your answer is going to be C, encapsulation. Encapsulation is a sealing off of disintegrating asbestos. Capping is covering over the top of a landfill with dirt and landscaping. So maybe we have this asbestos wrapped around a pipe as insulation. They're suggesting we paint over that with maybe a rubbery type compound that as it dries, it's going to seal in that asbestos and prevent it from being airborne. That's encapsulation. However, you have not solved the problem. Encapsulation is a way of deferring the problem. At one point, that asbestos is still going to have to be dealt with. That is encapsulation. Same solution for lead paint. You paint over it, encapsulating the lead. Next question. You sure learn a lot with these questions. A neighborhood has a large Asian population. When a Chinese couple came to a broker to look for a home to buy, the broker suggested they look at listings only in that neighborhood. The broker violated the Fair Housing Act because the broker's actions constitute A. Redlining, B. Blockbusting, C. Stereotyping, or D. Steering. And your answer is going to be D. Steering. Channeling home seekers toward or away from particular neighborhoods based on national origin or any of the other protected classifications is called steering. Steering. Next question. The provisions of the ADA, which is the Americans with Disability Act, apply to any employer with at least A. 10 or more employees, B. 15 or more employees, C. 12 or more employees, or D. 5 or more employees. And your answer is going to be 15 or more employees. Employees must make reasonable accommodations that enable an individual with a disability to perform essential job functions. Any employer, once they reach 50 or more employees, have to start making accommodations to employ disabled individuals. Americans with Disability Act. Our next question is going to be, a house has been on the market for several months because most buyers do not want to walk through the master bedroom to reach another bedroom. The floor plan is an example of A. Physical deterioration, B. Functional obsolescence, C. Economic obsolescence, or D. Regression. And your answer is going to be functional obsolescence, defined as the market's response to the item. There is nothing physically wrong with the house, but the design is outdated, functionally obsolescent. Perhaps buyers would be more interested if the room were marketed as a home office or a walk-in closet. Might be the way to do it. Functional obsolescence, the market's response to an item. Next question. A document that indicates that a loan has been made is called A. Satisfaction, B. Mortgage, C. Promissory note, and D. Deed of trust. And our answer is going to be a document that indicates that a loan has been made is called a promissory note. The evidence that a loan has been made is found in the promissory note. A mortgage or deed of trust provides security for the loan. That's the collateral instrument. A satisfaction or release indicates that the loan has been repaid in full. Something that is obvious to me in the question is it says nothing about a mortgage loan. This could be an auto loan, a credit card loan. Anytime you borrow money, you sign a promissory note, including buying a house. At closing, two main documents a buyer signs, a promissory note and another document where they pledge their property as collateral to back up the promissory note. In some states, that's called a mortgage. In other states, it's a deed of trust. But in this case, the promissory note. Okay, so let's move on to our next question. All of these are essential to a valid real estate sales contract, except A. Legally competent parties, B. Consideration, C, earnest money deposit held in an escrow account, or D, offer and acceptance. And your answer is going to be an earnest money deposit held in an escrow account. Earnest money is an optional term in a contract, not a requirement. The essential elements of a contract are offer and acceptance. One party has to make an offer, the other party accepts. Consideration, normally that's money given in exchange for the property, and made by legally competent parties. There is no requirement that we have an earnest money deposit. Our next question is going to be, what kind of listing agreement is illegal in many states because the potential for conflict of interest between a broker's fiduciary responsibility to the seller and the broker's profit motive? What kind of listing is usually illegal in most states? Answer, exclusive right to sell listing. B, net listing. C, exclusive agency listing. And D, open listing. And I think you know this one. The answer is going to be B, net listings, because a broker is free to offer the property at any price greater than the net amount. A net listing can create a conflict of interest between the broker's fiduciary responsibility to the seller and the broker's profit motive. Thus, a net listing are illegal in many states and discouraged in others. Net listings. The seller says, I want 150. Your commission is anything you can get over 150. That's a net listing. Next question. A tenant rents an apartment under a 1-year written lease. The expiration date of the lease is May 1st. How much notice must the landlord give the tenant to recover possession when the lease expires? Your answers are going to be A, 1 week, B, 60 days, C, 30 days, or D, none. And your answer is going to be none. Why? The lease will be terminated May 1st and estate for years. By definition, no notice is required. If the tenant or landlord wants notice, a paragraph requiring that notice of intention to terminate be given must be added to the lease. This lease does not say that. It just says the lease expires May 1st. It has a definite termination date and estate for years. No notice is required, as opposed to a periodic tenancy, which is common in residential, that requires the tenant to give some type of notice to terminate the lease. And that notice period works for the same for the landlord. If the landlord plans on raising the rent, they'd have to notify the tenant before that notice period as well. None required here. Our next question. Who are the parties to a listing agreement? Who are the parties to a listing agreement? A, buyer and sales associate. B, buyer and seller. C, seller and broker. Or D, seller and sales associate. Well, the parties to a listing agreement are going to be C, seller and broker. The seller and broker are parties to the listing agreement. Listings remain the property of the broker, even if the sales associate who represented the broker in securing the listing leaves the company. The listing belongs to the broker. It's a contract between the seller and the broker. Our next question. What form must be provided to a loan applicant within 3 business days of application? A, settlement transfer. B, loan estimate. C, closing disclosure. D, mortgage servicing. We have a buyer we put in front of our lender to be approved for our loan. The lender does their thing. They come back and say, this buyer is approved. What is that called? They document the lender provides the buyer within 3 days of application is the loan estimate. TRID requires the loan estimate to be delivered to the loan applicant within 3 business days of loan application. Then, 3 days before closing, the buyer sits down with the loan officer and reviews the closing disclosure. This has all the final numbers, and there's little changes or tolerances that can happen between the loan estimate and the closing disclosure. The numbers have to be very close. So 3 days before closing is the disclosure. 3 days after application, it's the loan estimate. I think the main thing you need to remember is 3 days. 3 days and 3 days. Our next question. A real estate broker announces to the firm's sales associates that the top selling sales associate each quarter will receive a $1,000 bonus. This constitutes an A. Implied unilateral contract. B. Express bilateral contract. C. Implied bilateral contract. Or D. Express unilateral contract. Well, this one's tough, but sometimes you just have to think about it. The broker announces to the firm's sales associates, which is express. They've stated these terms: become my top sales associate, and you'll receive a $1,000 bonus. Now, you don't have to become the top sales associate, but if you do, the broker is obligated to pay you that bonus. What do we know about that? That's unilateral. Only one party is bound. So our answer here is D, express unilateral contract. The offer of a bonus to the top selling sales associate each quarter is an express contract because the broker clearly stated the offer to the sales associates. It is a unilateral contract because the broker is obligated to keep the promise, but the sales associates are not obligated to perform. A unilateral contract as opposed to a bilateral contract where 2 or more parties are bound. A sales contract is a bilateral contract. But here we have unilateral. We're learning today, aren't we? Next question. A deed of trust involves all these terms except A, mortgagor, B, trustee, C, borrower, or D, lender. Well, what you need to know is under a deed of trust, which again is the collateral instrument used in some states. Some states use mortgages, some states use deed of trust as the collateral instrument. With a deed of trust, there is no mortgagor. You only have a mortgagor with a mortgage. The borrower under a deed of trust is called the trustor. So remember that. Trustor instead of mortgagor. Our next question is going to be, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act prohibits lenders from discriminating against credit applicants on the basis of all of these factors, except A, marital status, B, religion, C, income from public assistance, or D, past credit history. And your answer is going to be D, past credit history. Lenders may deny a loan request because the borrower's previous credit history. Otherwise, lenders may not discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, receipt of public assistance, age, and marital status. The protected classes under ECOA. Our next question. A lender who collects payments, processes them, and follow up on loan delinquencies is said to A. Service the loan, B. Underwrite the loan, C. Increase the yield to the lender, or D. Ensure loan payments. And the answer is going to be A. Service the loan. In addition to the income directly related to making loans, some lenders derive income from servicing loans for other mortgage lenders or investors who've purchased the loans. Sometimes you don't even know your loan has been sold. You're still making payments to Wells Fargo, but they've sold your loan to an investor. They're just being paid to service the loan, which is collecting your monthly payment, maintaining your escrow account, and paying your taxes and insurance bills when they become due, servicing the loan. Our next question. What does private mortgage insurance cover? A. Pays the borrower if the borrower loses the house to a title claim. B. Protects the top 20 to 30% of the loan against borrower default. C. Pays the lender if the borrower dies. Or D. Reimburses the cosigner if the borrower defaults. What does private mortgage insurance cover? And your answer here is going to be B. Protects the top 20 to 30% of the loan against borrower default. Private mortgage insurance, usually required for loans that are more than 80% of value, provides security to the lender if the borrower defaults. If the lender has to sell the home at a foreclosure auction and they can't get all their money back through the foreclosure process, they can turn to the private mortgage insurance company. In this case, VA and FHA, as we said before, they don't make loans, they insure loans, and in both cases there's a fee involved. But that's the government insuring the loan. With conventional, the government's not involved, so it's private mortgage insurance. Have you ever wondered what the difference is between MIP and PMI? That's it right there. PMI is private. Think of it that you're buying insurance from State Farm to ensure that the loan is repaid. Private mortgage insurance. Next question. For fair housing, what is the definition of the term disability? A. An impairment of mobility that prevents a person from using stairs. B. A physical impairment that requires a caregiver's assistance. C. An impairment that permits a person from holding a job. Or D. An impairment that substantially limits one or more of an individual's major life activities. I'll give you a few extra seconds on this one. Your answer is going to be D. An impairment that substantially limits one or more of an individual's major life activities. The definition of the term disability is very broad and focuses on impairments that prevent or restrict a person from performing tasks that are the central importance to most people's lives. Okay, well, let's move on to our next question. One way that property managers meet the goals of the ECOA is by A. Disqualifying tenant applicants on the basis of receiving welfare payments. B. Making sure to use the same lease application for every applicant. C. Establishing that certain buildings do not allow children as residents. Or D. Not evaluating certain tenant applicants through the use of credit reports. Meets the goals of the ECOA is to B is your answer. Make sure to use the same lease application for every applicant. Equality is the key. It is acceptable use credit reports. However, managers need to require them from all applicants. ECOA prohibits discrimination on the basis of a receipt of public assistance such as welfare. A property manager's first responsibility to the owner should be to A. Report all day-to-day financial and operating decisions to the owner on a regular basis. B. Realize the highest return possible consistent with the owner's instructions. C. Ensure that rental rates are below market average. Or D. Keep the building's occupancy rate at 100%. Give you a few seconds to answer. And your answer is going to be B. Realize the highest return possible consistent with the owner's instructions. The role of the property manager is to achieve the objectives of the property owner, whatever that might be. They all have different objectives. Generate income for the owner and preserve and or increase the value of the investment property. Okay, well, let's move on to our next question then. At least how much of a tank must be underground for it to be considered an underground storage tank? And your answers are A. 10%, B. 25%, C. 35%, or D. 15%. And your answer is going to be 10%. The official definition of an underground storage tank is one that is at least 10% underground. Thank you for watching. We're working on new videos every day. Subscribe below and hit that bell. You'll be notified as these videos are released. Thank you.